Hey, you. Thanks for tuning in. Just a quick heads up, this episode is rated R, so expect that there will be some language that you may not want your kids to hear, lots of adult topics, and quite possibly some explicit conversations about sex. This episode is probably not safe for work, though, I guess it depends on where you work.
You can actively lie, which, I've seen people do that as well, where they make up excuses about what they're out doing, and then when the kids work it out, they just feel like that sows the seeds of not being able to trust what your parents say. We've always taken the approach of we just tell our kids what's going on.
Welcome to Pleasure Central Radio, the place to rethink the assumptions we don't even realize we are making that keep us from getting what we truly want out of work, life, and love. Here is your sneak peek into an authentic, pleasure-focused conversation. You probably have distinct memories of when your parents had the sex talk with you. If they avoided that entirely, well, that's a memory in and of itself. I had my first sex talk with an auntie, sort of. We weren't related, but we knew each other well enough because our families knew each other well. She was much older and world-wise, and she helped me understand my body when my poor widowed dad didn't know what to say. I'm glad she was around. I made much better informed choices than many of my peers because of conversations with her. I've been thinking about parents and what they tell their kids about sex and their relationship changes. For some of my partners, I might meet their kids, I might not. It depends on how much time we spend together and where our dates usually happen. I don't know why I'm not squeamish talking about sex anymore. Once upon a time I was. Maybe having a series of really kind, loving partners in safe, long-term relationships gave me a leg up communication-wise. And then being a sex worker and a courtesan for a decade, and hearing so many people's stories, realizing that we all have the same fears. Years later, my dad and I have had lots of talks about sex and love and partnership. I've learned more about him as a man through these talks than any family dinner. I don't have kids of my own, and I doubt I ever will. But if I did, my podcast guest today, Rowan and Athalie, raised their kids pretty similar to the way that I think I would. They talked to them about sex early, they introduced their poly partners to the kids, and they're remarkably open, as I think you'll see. Frank, open, and direct. That's always been my style too. Most of the people that I've dated have had families of their own, and everyone handles what they disclose to their kids differently.
Hey there, guys. It's good to have you back in the studio.
It's nice to be back.
Great to be here.
So I have Rowan and Athalie, a couple who I interviewed a few months ago about their relationship and their religious upbringing and polyamory and how they navigated through all of that. And now I'm really excited to have you guys back because you have kids and you talk to your kids about polyamory and about sex, and I have so many people who wonder how you do that, how you get away with it, and how you make it comfortable, well, as comfortable as possible, and what your logic is behind all of this decision. So I'd love to have a bit of a conversation here, and I have no kids, so I am not an authority on any part of this. I'm just really curious.
We have kids, but
I was thinking the same thing.
We have things that we do that seem to be working so far.
Would you like to share one that you use on a daily basis that you find is helpful?
Maybe you want to start with maybe setting some context about what it means to actually talk to your kids about poly, because I think you were talking about talking to your kids about poly and sex. Those are two distinct things. And polyamory, our discussions with our kids about polyamory are not primarily about sex. In fact, they started completely separate from sex.
Say that sentence one more time.
Okay.
There's a spring.
Yeah. Our discussions with our kids around polyamory are not about sex, or maybe there's a small amount of questions they might have around sex, but our discussion around polyamory is largely around relationships and dynamics and things like that. And I think that surprises people, because I think when most people hear talking to your kids about polyamory, they're like, oh my God, you talk to your kids about all the crazy sex shit you do. And that makes people nervous.
There's a lot of assumptions in that sentence, aren't there?
Yeah. And we were having a chat before we recorded this, and both Athalie and I actually, without talking to each other, came up with the same way of describing this, or like maybe resetting the way people are thinking about this, which is, imagine you're a single parent, monogamous, and you have decided that you're going to start dating, and you're going to talk to your kid about that. You're not going to sit your kid down and be like, hey, Timmy, it's been a couple of years since your dad and I divorced, and Mum's just horny as fuck, and I want to go out and get boned by as many guys as possible, and I'm going to have this guy, like, do this, and I've never tried this. That's not a discussion you would have with your kids, right?
Probably no matter what their age is.
Yeah.
Tonight's the night for anal. Just wanted you to know.
What you're probably going to do is approach that more, hey, your dad and I have been divorced for a couple of years, and I'm feeling like it's about time for me to have some interest in a relationship with somebody else again, so I'm going to go out, and you might see me chatting with some other people, and we're going to work this out together. We're not trying to replace your dad, and we'll talk before I'll go out, and you might explain to your kid what you're going to do. I might go out and have dinner, and our neighbor or my mom is probably going to watch you while that happens. We'll talk about it before anybody comes into our house. Do you have any concerns or questions, or how do you feel about that? That's probably more the discussion you would have. And for us, poly was exactly that as well.
Yeah, we had just been watching a great show, which we can also plug on here, on Netflix, Atypical.
Oh, yeah.
With our kids. And in one of the characters, spoiler alert, one of the parents cheats on the other parent in that show. And so we had some conversations right around the same time around, like, what cheating is. And one of the things we wanted to differentiate was that, like, the problem with this, in this situation, was not that someone was having sex with more than one person. It was that there was a different agreement, and there was, like, deception and lying and all this other stuff happening, which was that was the actual problem, not you had sex with two people. It's just not the agreement that this couple had. And so I think because we had fairly recently talked about that, it was, I don't know, felt pretty natural when we sat down to be like, this is different from cheating because this is the thing everybody's agreeing to, basically.
Yeah. As far as it's been a little bit ago now, but as I remember it, we talked about that situation exactly like you said, and then we talked about our own, and like up until now, we've had an agreement that we use the word date to start with, that we only date each other, but we have decided that we are also okay with dating other people as well, and that doesn't change anything about our relationship. And so I think that's the terminology we use to start with our kids. And honestly, like, we were brand new to any form of non-monogamy at that point, and so we didn't really know what we were talking about.
We did wait a little while. We tried it for a little while to make sure that it was something that we could see ourselves doing.
Yeah.
Continuing doing before we talked to them about it, but yeah.
It's interesting because that conversation that you just modeled sounds so much like the conversation you would have with a partner as you're opening up a relationship. Like, hey, this is what I'm planning on doing. What are your concerns? Is there anything you feel worried about? We'll talk about everything. That's really cool.
That's because that's good communication, giving people that have a stake in the matter a chance to say what they're thinking and feeling. So
yeah.
I think sometimes we forget that kids are like actual humans that have all these same thoughts and feelings, and they want a space to be able to verbalize them out loud.
Not just appendages that we have to drag around and figure out who's going to babysit.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that was the part that surprised me too, was the kids. People had asked when we'd been talking with our friends about how non-monogamy was going and where we were headed with it. And when we told them that we had talked about it with their kids, they're like, what the fuck? Like, you guys are insane. But then, like, kids are going to notice, using that example of a single parent who's starting to date, we've had people around us that have done that, and there's various different approaches. One, you can be upfront with your kid about the fact that you're dating again. You can try and hide it from them. Kids are really smart. They always know something's going on.
Kids are really, really smart.
Yeah.
And then they'll create their own story, which is probably not going to be accurate about what they think is going on.
Yeah.
Or helpful.
Or you can actively lie, which, I've seen people do that as well, where they make up excuses about what they're out doing, and then when the kids work it out, I feel like that sows the seeds of not being able to trust what your parents say. We've always taken the approach of we just tell our kids what's going on in a way that's age appropriate. I think age appropriate is often used to chicken out of really telling your kids what's going on. So age appropriate in the sense that we didn't really talk about sex to start with. Our kids are kind of in the 8 to 11 year range. So we left any mention of sex out of it, but we'll talk about this later. We have talked with our kids about sex.
They brought that up on their own.
Exactly.
When we talked about it then. So.
And that's been our approach, is we tell our kids the truth about everything that's going on, and then we will matter-of-factly answer any questions that they have. Which I think that's something you had picked up from somewhere, that a child will let you know that they're old enough to talk about something when they start asking questions about it.
I'm pretty sure I got that from one of our family therapists.
Yeah.
The trauma counselors that we went to.
Yeah.
If a kid is aware enough to put together a question and be curious about it, then they're ready to hear the answer to that question. Yeah. At least there's of course exceptions to everything, but
Yeah. Some version of that answer, at least.
Yeah. Or as an example, this is not really specifically about sex, but it's about vaginas, so therefore it's part of this conversation. My son wanted to have... He knew from some of the books we'd read about human development stuff that women have periods. And one time he came into the bathroom. He still comes into the bathroom. It's not a sacred space for me. And then he was like, "Oh, what are you doing?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm putting a tampon in." And he was like, "Oh, can I watch?" And I was like, "Actually, yes, because what better way to learn how a tampon works? And there's probably no other person in your life, possibly a partner someday, who's going to be like, yes, watch me put a tampon in." And then he was just like, "Oh, is the string there so you can pull it back out later?" "Yeah." "Okay, cool. I have no more questions about tampons now." And moving on.
I do have questions about Minecraft, though.
Yes. But it was he's asking these questions. Yes, now you understand it. Now I feel like he's going to have factual information, and it's not a weird thing to him, and he's not going to create some weird story about what it means to put a tampon in or have periods, or I don't know. So that's a communication approach we've had with him about lots of things. If you ask me about this, then I'm going to tell you, kind of thing.
And I think that's to me, that's been the sign to me that our approach is working, is that our kids are coming to us with questions that my parents didn't have any weird stuff around sex. There was no religious environment causing shame around sex or anything. But there was all the usual social taboo-ness around sex, and so I feel like our kids are asking us questions that I would have felt embarrassed to ask my parents, and they don't seem to have any embarrassment around it at all. So that's great to me if the kids are coming to us for information.
Yeah, that's a great sign.
Not Google.
Or their friends, because other 11-year-olds are really great sources of accurate information about sex.
Speaking of sources of information, have you found anything that in talking with them, you've realized, you've come up with something erroneous here, I'm going to have to correct this idea?
I think because we started fairly early talking about relationships and sex and body development and consent and all these things from a really young age, and by young age 6 years old. We started by going through some books that just had factual information, which we can give you the references. They have different books for different kind of developmental stages.
Yes, please.
I feel like even our older child who's doing the sex ed thing in school, none of it's really new information to her. But we have had kids that lived with us who had experiences of sexual abuse, and so there is definitely some learned body shame body shame stuff that comes with that, I think, that takes unlearning. But I don't know that it's necessarily they explicitly encountered something that was wrong, unless you can think of an example.
I'm thinking of I don't have anything for our children, so this is just a funny story, but I remember one of our friends, their son asked if she could eat an egg because he would like to have a brother again. They thought that conception happened by eating an egg.
This was also the same friend who had asked, I think he was about 6 or 7, asked if he could borrow his mom's credit card so he could go to Walmart and buy her a husband.
Oh.
I think it was or was it by a sibling? It was one of those. It's like, okay.
Oh my goodness.
Not quite how this works, but.
Yeah. My son called his testicles tentacles to start with too. That was quite fun.
That was quite fun.
Have your tentacles descended yet?
How many tentacles do you have?
Exactly. Yeah. And he still laughs about that and thinks that's funny now. Occasionally we talk about that conversation. I was probably like 3 or 4 in the bathtub. He realized that there was something more than a penis attached to his groin. So he just had his head between his legs, like just fascinated by the fact that there was more things there than what he had realized.
It's so interesting. Kids are so curious.
Yeah.
And what a gift to have this shame-free environment where you can just talk and communicate and share things. I feel like I had a really good communication with my dad about sex, but not until I was 16 or 17. And it was still transformative getting to have some of these conversations. Even though none of them were super explicit, they were all connected to, relationships and how do you know when you want to have sex with somebody and how do you do consent. We didn't really talk about consent the way we do now. So I'm curious, you guys shared consent with your kids when you were really young. How did you teach that?
Well, so the books we mentioned have some of the more talking about consent in terms of relating to sex, but I think it's also something that you teach your kids in all aspects of your life. So it's not just like sex. You teach your kids that they have autonomy over their body when like their relative wants to hug them goodbye and they don't want to. Or you're like, can I have a kiss? And they say no. And as the parent, you're like, I respect that. Like you said, you don't want to kiss. I think waiting to like suddenly have this body autonomy thing when you're old enough to have sex it's like too late in the game. If you haven't shown them that they can say no to things that they don't want prior to that, then
they're really set up for failure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually really struck by how normal this is. The other day we had someone visit who, we just haven't had, that topic hasn't come up between us. And he asked one of our kids, would you like around your kids? And you're just trying to warm up to them a bit and break the ice with them. He was like, do you like to be tickled? Our son was like, no. And then he gave him like a little tickle. And I was like, what a weird thing where you can ask somebody if they like something and they say they don't and then you do it. Like, imagine that in any other scenario.
Yeah.
You walk into somebody at work, do you like having your ear pinched? No. And then you pinch their ear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is weird, yeah.
Yeah. But it's totally normal. I feel like that, asking a kid if they want to be tickled and they say no and then you tickle them, that's something that a very large percentage of the population would do. But it struck me how weird, what a weird interaction.
Yeah.
And then Alex we're very focused on consent in our house, and he was very apologetic, and I was like, it's fine, I think it's quite weird, but why it's weird that it's weird?
It's weird that it's normal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think we've also, between siblings too, both of our kids have ADHD and there's some impulse control stuff too, so we worked a lot on you don't just lash out and physically assault someone's body the instant you are frustrated about something, or they're making a noise you don't like, or just getting in someone's space, touching their body in any way is not we've done a lot of work around the safety of that. So it's just, I think it's all very interrelated. And then we've used sex within polyamory. That's just a little subset of how you relate and how you communicate and what's going on. And if your consent is only for when you have sex, then you've missed a whole bunch of other opportunities to be able to say what you want and don't want.
Yeah.
For yourself and your body.
A whole lot of opportunities for empowerment.
Yeah. Which I think is especially important for anybody who's experienced sexual abuse.
Yes.
To be able to have the chance to say no and somebody actually respects that is hugely, hugely healing and empowering to get to have that experience again, but then have it actually go the way it should have gone the first time.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like if anyone had pushback on this, I can picture some people being like, are you not raising super entitled children who just are used to getting their own way all the time? Probably yes, in some respects. I think we are. I think that is a thing that we are having to teach our kids as well in conjunction with this. But I'd much rather be honing in the subtleties of what it means to be a respectful and polite human, but have them understand consent and the ability to say no than the other way around.
And the ability to say yes. That's
Yeah.
the flip side of consent.
Yes.
You can't really say yes unless you can say no.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And so much of the consent conversation is focused around the no because it's usually the no that's not respected.
Yeah.
But there is, of course, the positive fuck yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You know, one of the things that I loved about your guys' house is you have bookshelves all over the place with such interesting books on them. I'm reading a book right now called What You Really Want, and it's a very interesting book. It's full of journal prompts and things for people to help themselves figure out what actually matters to them, what brings them pleasure, how do they communicate about it, what are the things that they think or that they believe about sex that may not be true, but they've just never examined. And it's a cool book. I may end up doing a book study with a group of people because
I feel like those are all questions, too, that we're not taught to answer for ourselves in any other sphere either. Not just in sex. There's all these things that you're supposed to want or that are supposed to be, like, fulfilling that may or may not be for you. And unless you're able to, like, look at all the messaging you've received throughout your life and be like, do I actually like this job? Do I actually care this much about making a certain amount of money? There's just it's just a whole framework of autonomy that we're not, for a weirdly individualistic society, we're not taught how to negotiate for ourselves to even know what we like and don't like in any area of our lives, which is really sad.
Well, I think that individualism in our society is really quite focused in one direction. It's focused in the direction of freedom, particularly financial freedom and career freedom. And while there's a lot of sexual freedom, it's usually in this very strict, like, you can have sexual freedom if you're going to be a slut. You can dress like this and you can do this and that's okay. You can have sexual freedom if you're going to be like a housewife and you can do this and that's okay. But they're not supposed to overlap. So the people that are willing to buck their traditions and say, no, I'm just going to be who I am instead of who you think I'm supposed to be, tend to be my best friends.
They come on this podcast.
Yes, they do. Quite a lot. Quite lovely.
I remember hearing someone I listened to a bit. It was a podcast coming out of Christianity. They were a group of people that were deconstructing things and in a similar journey to me. And he was talking about how he has this radar for people when he's trying to find people that he might want to spend more time in. And he usually starts by throwing out something outrageous and just seeing how they react. And he had a guest on and he was recounting the first time that they'd met. And he went up to her and just introduced himself, threw something out, and she was like, oh, I'm blah, 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 and I'm a sex witch. And he was like, and here's somebody that's going to be my best friend.
Yes, that sounds very
And
familiar.
my interest to speak. Tell me more.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I've been having a blast. Now that we're socializing more and getting to get out and meet people, I'm meeting friends of friends, and I'm being very blunt and open about, yes, I'm a courtesan, yes, I'm a podcaster, I basically have orgasms for a living, and it starts the most interesting conversations.
And I'm sure it quickly eliminates the people who can't go there with you, so you don't have to, like, invest in a relationship with somebody who can't actually accept you.
Yeah.
In the end, anyway.
It is a great way of filtering. I ended up being invited to a small group of women's night. It was a friend of mine, and she knew everybody, but none of us knew each other. And it was supposed to be, a couple hours barbecue in our backyard. But it was so fascinating. We were having so much fun talking, and we all got in talking about orgasms and things, and ended up basically coaching them through, verbally, not physically, through how to have an orgasm when you've never had one, and how to have an orgasm with a partner when you've never had one. It was so fun and exciting, and just, the way they all lit up, got free and open and playful. Yeah, I want that for more people.
That's why you have this podcast.
That's why I have this podcast.
I was thinking when we were talking about this beforehand, you mentioned the books a couple of times. You had some thoughts around why you felt books were such a good resource for talking to children about sex.
Well, in these particular books, there's two little characters, which, to be funny, are a bird and a bee. And one of them is very reluctant, has the, ew, this is so gross, I don't want to talk about it, blah, 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 I'm plugging my ears, kind of response to everything that they learn as they go through the book. And the other one is like, whoa, this is so fascinating, like, I want to know more. And so it kind of embodies the two, like, extreme reactions, I think, that kids often have.
We have one of each in our house.
Yes, exactly. And so the one who was the, like, would be like, I'm not joining you for reading this book. But then I'd look up from the book and she's like sitting in the hallway, listening, but not listening. Oh my God, no, I'm not interested. And then we'd find the book in her bed 2 days later, and she was like, she's clearly been like, oh. So I just feel like it gives a lot of freedom to let the kid engage on their level and normalized. Yeah, if you're just pre-puberty, it's a normal reaction to be like, ugh, or she would frequently say, I'm never going through puberty. It's not happening. And I'm always like, okay.
I'm going to will my body to stay 10 years old.
It's not working.
At one point, I was shopping and I was like, oh, training bras. Are you interested in looking at them? Ew, Mom, this conversation is over. I'm walking away now. I'm like, okay, at least you know, like, you can come back and have this conversation if you ever wish.
Yeah, I feel like reading a book, any book, and I agree these books that we've been using in particular I'm very impressed with, but they invite a conversation if the kid wants to have a conversation. They're certainly not in place of a conversation. But for a kid that's not comfortable enough having the conversation, they give a less threatening way to actually get the information, right? You can be sitting in the hallway and this book can be being read in the living room, but it's not a parent trying to speak directly at you. But if you're comfortable and you have a million questions, you can go and ask your parent a question and have a direct conversation with them.
Yeah.
Or you can take the book to your room. Or one of our kids, you can take the book to school. And we've always gone the age bracket up from, so the book would say like,
well,
6 to 10.
We've done it for the age of the kid, the oldest of the kids we're reading it to. So
yeah.
It's been a little bit above the age bracket for the...
Yeah, and I think
kids.
even for the child within the age range, we've kind of erred on the side of going up early.
Yeah.
So very proud of our kids for taking the book to school in general as a philosophy, taking accurate information.
Share with your friends.
Suggested we probably might want to leave that one at home, given we're sharing a little more information than I think most parents probably.
But even that is like a chance to talk to. It was like the conversation wasn't like, how dare you do that? It's, I don't mind that you took this there, but there's probably a lot of kids who haven't had this conversation with their parents yet, and their parents may want to be the first person that introduces them to these ideas, or just not this is a bad thing. Kind of like when we talk about swearing with our kids, it's I don't care if you say shit, but you need to know the context of where it's okay to say that. And if you say that at school, you will probably be disciplined because the school has a rule about that. There's just
and even when
different settings for different things.
Yeah. And I think through the different stages of maybe allowing some swearing at home, or even when it wasn't, it was always with the context of these words aren't bad. You just need to be old enough to understand how to use them the right way, and we're not quite there yet. And then, morphing into more and more freedom as they show they're responsible.
That's beautiful. I think parents are some of the coolest peoples on the planet, and amazing. It is so hard to be a parent. I have watched my siblings and my friends and the people I'm dating, and I'm just like, you guys have endless amounts of energy and compassion and kindness for this little person. Even when they're sweet and adorable, that runs out at some point.
And there's nothing like having a kid to make you confront some of your own. Maybe it's also like having a relationship. It's like a mirror. If you weren't sure what would make you lose your shit and scream at someone, if you're like, I'm not a person who does that, your child will undoubtedly find that thing. And you can then know what that is.
Saw somebody comment once in a comedy routine that children, I think a general idea was that children, sociopaths, they just observe and they collect information. And then after about 15 years, they know the perfect knife to stab in your back, and they'll do it while you're making them a sandwich in the kitchen. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
True.
Yeah. So, any last words for any parents out there that are wondering, is it worth talking to my kids about this, whatever age they happen to be?
I have a thought.
Go ahead.
As someone who had to learn all of this stuff for myself after and unlearn a lot of things that caused a lot of harm in my adult life, I think kids are a lot smarter than we think they are. They know a lot more than we think they know. And I don't think it's going to be a thing where you will regret having a conversation with your children. I do think you have to do some of the work of on yourself. And if you're in the process of doing that, it's not like you can't talk to your kids, but you need to process some of your own baggage around sex and be able to communicate that to your kid too, if that's you're in the middle of that, so that the message that you're passing on to your kids is not perpetuating the stuff that lots of us have learned that we may or may not, maybe we consciously don't agree with it anymore, but we're not realizing that the way we talk or choose not to talk about this is still perpetuating that message to our kids.
Yeah. Yeah, I think similar to that for me, I know colloquially, people talk about having the talk with their kids. And it's not that having a talk is too little, too late. Maybe it is too little, too late, but it's obviously better than nothing. If you have to sit your 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old down and have the talk with them, that's better than nothing. But I think just having an ongoing discussion with your children around sex, it's just an everyday part of life, the same way you would teach your kids about finances or diet or being respectful or trying to get them to tidy their room or any of these things where we're trying to teach our kids to be healthy, functioning, successful members of society. Having a healthy view of sex is not like some weird taboo thing that's going to mess up your children by over-sexualizing them too young. I mean, we talk to our kids about money before they're old enough to have a job and a bank account and all that stuff. It's better to have the knowledge before you have the ability to accept the responsibility for it. It's better to know about diet until you're responsible for cooking your own meals. Like, having that knowledge in advance is good. And same with sex. Understanding what sex is, what STIs are, what consent is, all of that stuff before you're actually about to have sex, which for most of our kids is probably going to happen younger than many of us would expect, I'm guessing. Yeah, it's just better to make it normal and talk about it early.
I have a funny anecdotal experience too. So this was after we had talked to them about poly, and I think they'd met one of my partners. And then one of the kids was just like, what? We've read these books together. They understand how babies are made. And so they come with a question. Mom, I know you don't want to have any more babies, something I'm very vocal about. So how are you going to make sure you don't get pregnant when you have sex with this partner? Do you use one of those things that you put on? What are they called? Like, I think they mentioned them in the book, but he couldn't remember the name. And then I talked about, this is what I do for birth control and use condoms to prevent infections. And then he wants to know how you put a condom on. And I was like, surely some medical website has a video. So we found a video from, I don't know, Mayo Clinic or something about how to put on a condom. And he was just like, oh, the penis has to be hard. Oh, that makes so much sense. And that was really the question. He was, I guess, trying to figure out how you would put a condom on a... Anyway. And then he was like, okay, cool, I'm done. That was all. And I was thinking, like, what a random conversation, but important. And
so now he came to you with that question because we've talked about sex a lot and feels comfortable. So he has a legitimate interest. He gets to watch a medical video with some kind of banana or
silicone thing mounted on a countertop.
Yeah. And learns how to put a condom on. Now imagine your kid doesn't feel comfortable asking that and decides to go find that out for himself on Google. It's going to be a very different video. I know which one I would prefer my kids to be doing. So.
Also, I think partly because I work in the medical field, so it's easy for me to talk about things factually. Like, these are conversations I also have with my patients. I would say for people that maybe feel like, oh, I don't have that comfort level, it's also okay to tell your kids, this feels weird to me because nobody's ever taught me how to have this conversation before. So I might mess it up, or I might have to come back and revisit things. I had that happen one time when my son was asking why he couldn't just be naked in the house. And I was like, we have kids that live in this house at that point. We're doing foster care who have been hurt by, like, men have used their penises to hurt them. And so it's not just you just showing up how you are. Like, there's all these other layers. And then I felt like, so the next day I was like, oh my God, have I, like, shamed him for having a penis? What if he, like, thinks, oh, this is bad, and so I just was like, hey, remember that conversation we were having yesterday? I feel like we need to talk about this more. And it's not just like he knows that some parents, like, hit their children, or there's, like, the physical abuse thing. He can easily imagine that. I was like, it's not that there's something bad about this person's hands. It's what they decided to do with it that's the problem. And he was just like, oh yeah, of course. Yeah. Of course that's what of course that's what you're talking about. But I was just like, okay, maybe I didn't do that. Maybe I messed that up. Yeah. Kids are forgiving.
Yeah.
And modeling, like, hey, I don't know, this is new for me, but I'm doing it anyway, even though it feels uncomfortable for me. It's like,
what a great thing to teach your kids.
That's a skill that they need too. And you can do that without it being, or showing them that it's important enough to push through that discomfort to learn and educate yourself and somebody you care about. I think that's really valuable.
Totally agree. I feel like as parents, there's this pressure to, like, pretend you have it all together. But I think one of the most powerful things you can do is model that to your children.
Yeah.
And model being wrong, model apologizing. I feel like apologizing to your kids is like this
sign of weakness.
Sign of weakness or something which is stupid. You're modelling the kind of behaviour you want your kids to have. If you're wrong, go back and apologise. And teach them to do the same thing.
Make it right.
Yeah.
Well, such a pleasure to have you both on the show. Thank you for coming and talking about this such important topic about which I know nothing. And I'm really happy to have your input on the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. Maybe you'll need to have us back in about 10 years once both of our kids have gone through puberty and are probably starting to have sex lives themselves, and then we can update you on how our techniques have worked or not worked. What we would do differently in retrospect.
I'm game for that. Well, thank you so much, and have a wonderful evening. Thanks for listening to Pleasure Central Radio, hosted by me, Rebecca Beltran. My guests today were Rowan and Athalie. Technical production by me. I get significant creative feedback from my beta listeners group. For this episode, special thanks goes to Tom and to Becky. Thank you for your input. And to anyone else I might have missed, you are loved. If you've listened to this episode today and been intrigued, I would love to hear what really hit home for you or surprised you, or maybe something that helped you from this episode. There's a voice message button on the homepage of pleasurecentralradio.com. I would love to hear what made a difference. It's as easy on your mobile phone as leaving a message on my answering machine. I'm especially interested in any new concepts that motivated you to do anything different in your own life. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you for being a part of the conversation, and I look forward to your company on the next episode. A while ago, I asked you to record a short snippet about why you listen to this show. I'll share some of these snippets over the next couple of months. Here's what one listener had to say.
Hello, my name is Dr. Bradley Franklin, and I listen to Pleasure Central Radio for many reasons, but one of them is very important for me to understand how the body works in its completeness. I enjoy listening to her station so that I can learn about the sexual side of the body and how it is natural and wonderful to embrace. And thanks to her podcast, I am able to have a much broader perspective on human sexuality and how it relates to health.
If the idea of talking to your kids about some of these sensitive subjects freaks you out, know that you're not alone. And also know that it's okay. We all have awkward moments growing up and as adults, and we get over it. The important thing is to establish a line of communication so that they can ask what they need to ask. Good luck.